In Chapter 9, you get information about the final two types of sentences, because in the past I've mentioned there are four: simple, compound, complex, compound, complex. So Chapter 9 is all about technically the complex sentence, but it does mention the compound complex sentence, which is the fourth. So I'm going to touch on it as well. Now, before we start with the material, I think this chapter gets a bit in depth than I necessarily want you to, know and understand really, really well. So I'm gonna go over the information it presents, and hopefully I can present it in a easier way if you're having any trouble reading it from the textbook. But like with a lot of the grammar stuff that I've mentioned before, if you don't grasp this completely, that's okay. I just want you to have a working knowledge of it. So if you don't know the tiny intricacies of what is happening within these complex sentences, because they do get complex, that's okay. Do your best with it, experiment, try, challenge yourself, but do what sounds right or do what comes natural. Alright, so what makes a complex sentence so complex? It contains an independent clause. Just one. We'll get to that in a second. So one independent clause. So here, I've really been craving chocolate donuts, and sadly this sentence is true. I am pregnant and I really, really like donuts right now. That's okay. My husband gets them for me, so that's good. So here's my independent clause. And again, reminder on what an independent clause is, it's one subject. So I, and then one verb, have been craving, technically. Okay, and then one dependent clause, which contains a subject and a verb, but it cannot stand alone. So because I'm pregnant is that dependent clause. If you tried to use this as a sentence, it would be incomplete. It would be a fragment. So here's your dependent clause. Here's your independent clause. That makes a complete sentence. A big hint that the textbook mentions is subordinating conjunctions, like because. Any word that kind of tips you off that, oh, it's either modifying something or it's qualifying something or it's doing some other job other than subject and verb, it's a pretty good clue. Especially at the beginning of a sentence. So don't take that as, absolute truth and concrete, but it's a good flag. Okay, so if you see a word like because, you're going to put your guard up as to whether or not it's a complex sentence. All right, so what makes it complex and compound? This is really all I'm going to mention about the compound complex sentences because we've already covered compound sentences. I've beaten them to death enough. And I will beat complex sentences to death enough. All you really need to know is that a compound complex sentence contains two or more independent clauses. So that's what makes it the compound sentence, plus one or more dependent clauses. So in this example, because I'm pregnant, I crave donuts, but I also crave French fries. So here you have one subject, one verb, second subject, second verb, and here's your dependent clause. Okay, another big hint, the coordinating conjunction and the comma. So here's your compound sentence, and the complex part comes in with the dependent clause. Okay, so really that's all I'm going to mention about it. It should be kind of self-explanatory. The name is pretty obvious. So with punctuation, when you have that dependent clause at the beginning of a sentence, you need to set it off with a comma. So since you brought me a chocolate donut, comma, I'll try to be less cranky. I'm really not too cranky, but chocolate donuts always help. So yes, in all the previous examples, there's the comma, there's the comma. You always need a comma after those dependent clauses. All right, relative clauses. This is when it starts to go downhill. So this is really good information, but if you don't understand it and totally grasp it, that's totally fine. It's another component of a complex sentence, so it makes a sentence complex without having that dependent clause set off with a comma, but you still have to know these because this is still a dependent clause. But again, if you can't label it as a relative clause, then I don't care. Just understand the general gist of this information. Okay, so the relative pronouns are that, which, who, whom, things like that. So here in this first example, the cat that is sitting on the sidewalk is mine. This makes the sentence complex because you have this clause in there. Makes it kind of tricky to spot. But the flag is the that, and then this whole phrase is actually a clause. Pardon me. This whole clause is modifying the cat. Which cat? It's the cat that's sitting on the sidewalk. Okay, and then are you going out with the same person who dumped me last year? Who is your relative pronoun? This whole clause modifies this person. So you need to understand that that and which refers to animals and things. Who and whom refer to humans. Try to keep those separate. All right, so here's a punctuation rule about relative clauses. You have to determine what's essential and what is not in order to know how to punctuate it properly. So if you determine that the non-essential info, I'm not going to go too hardcore into what essential and non-essential is. I think the book does a pretty good job of that, actually, in defining what is and is not essential, but I will cover it briefly here. So non-essential info is surrounded by commas. So in this example, my brother, who is 5, beats me up all the time. How do you know that this is non-essential? Does the sentence, my brother beats me up all the time, make sense? And is it a complete thought that a listener can fully understand? The answer is yes. So, who is 5? Granted, this clause makes it funny because who gets beat up by a 5-year-old? But this clause is not essential to understanding the meaning of the sentence. You still know that it's a brother who beats this person up all the time. Okay, so since it's non-essential, there are commas around it. I should have highlighted those. I think of them as hinges to a secret trap door. If you were to send this whole phrase, who is 5, down through the trap door and close the sentence up, it would still make sense. So that's how I think of it. So think of these as little hinges, and the phrase can just disappear and it would still make sense. All right, essential info doesn't need commas. It doesn't need the trapdoor. You need all of the information as part of the sentence. So the person who owns that dog needs to put it in the house until it stops barking. So who owns that dog is modifying this person. If you took out this information, the person needs to put it in the house until it stops barking. Okay, you can't understand all of the essential information that you need if you take that clause out. So you have to have that clause there. No trapdoor commas. Make sense? Hopefully. All right, again, remember, that which refers to animals and things, whom refers to humans. It's just, that's a good rule to remember. It'll just make you look smarter. All right, so this gets even more in depth with knowing which one to use. It's kind of like when we talked about how to know whether or not we use I or me. It's the same principle with whom. That which is a little different. You use that when the information is essential. You use which when the information is not essential. I didn't use that in that example, but try to keep that straight. Does that make sense? So if you have a sentence where you have the clause set off with commas, you'd use which. But if that information has to say in the sentence, you use that. So with who and whom is an extremely difficult thing to catch. So, I mean, at your level, like I say, I'm not going to be too picky about it. I'll try to correct and help you when I can, but I'm not expecting to get this perfect. So who is subjective? It's a subject. And when you use it, it's going to be followed by a verb. Can't even talk. So the boy who runs slowest is out of the race. Who is followed by runs. Runs is a verb. So who is a subject. So you use who, not whom. So down here, whom is objective, meaning it's the object of a sentence, and it's followed by a noun. So the boy whom the crowd cheers loudest for wins. So the crowd is a noun. You need whom for your pronoun. Okay, again, I'm not going to get too much deeper into that. If it helps clear it up from the book, then awesome. If not, that's okay too. All right, so sentence fragments become a problem when you are using dependent clauses, because sometimes you might start a sentence and then forget and put a period in and continue on your way. So it does happen. I see it quite frequently. Really easy to fix. You just have to catch them. So when you have a dependent clause or a relative clause just dangling by itself, it creates a fragment. No. But in order to fix it, all you have to do is attach that dependent clause to something, or take out whatever word or words make it a dependent clause. The book gives examples, so I'm not going to take the time to go into that. Look at the examples in the book. But again, it's really easy to fix. You just have to find them. So you have to be really careful about how you read. Make sure you look at your punctuation to understand that, oh, there's a period there. Where's the rest of my sentence? Like say, you're typing. In this case, we're not really writing on paper necessarily. Your typing can get ahead of your mind. Or I guess your mind can get ahead of your fingers and they can't catch up, and you just keep on going and leave a dependent clause all by itself. And you don't want to do that. So look out for fragments. You've got the 4 sentence types now: the simple, the compound, the complex, and the compound complex. So now that you know all of them, vary it up. Change your sentence structures, add variety, and this is what creates cohesion or flow to your paragraphs. So it's extremely important that you really vary your sentence types. Even within the complex, there's the 2 different types, the one with the clause at the phrase at the beginning of a sentence, or you could have a relative clause in the middle of the sentence. There's a lot of variety here. And we'll talk more about variety when we get to chapter 11, which is about combining sentences. So for now, do the best you can with this information. Work on creating some complex sentence structures and some complex structures, and keep trying to change up your variety and how you're compiling your sentences, because it really will help. So let me know if there's anything I can do for you.